Can people actually change? Is the question that I want to explore today. And we're going to get to the answer at the end of this, but I have a little story that I want to share, something I've been dealing with lately at work, actually. So last year, close to a year ago, maybe 8 months ago or so, we had an employee come in and join our company, and he interviewed really well. He had the experience we were looking for, and he seemed to fit the role in the perfect way that we needed. But over time, I kind of started to notice a difficulty in managing him. There was a moodiness to him, an attitude that would come out sometimes, and some of the people that worked under him reported the same thing as well. And it was strange because it's not something that came out at all during the interview process. He worked out okay for maybe about 3 months or so with us, and then out of the blue, he just ghosted us. He didn't show up to work. I think he maybe texted me one time that he was sick or something, but he'd been sick like 3 times the previous week. So that didn't really seem too likely. So he texted me one day he was sick and then ghosted me for a couple days. And eventually it came out. He did come up and tell us a few days later that he'd had a DUI, he'd lost his license, and he was going to have to go into rehab in order to find some help for an addiction that had been going on for a long time. So that was stressful. It kind of came in the midst of a schedule that was very busy. So we had to work hard to hire quickly and be able to fill in that gap so that we didn't get too behind on our production schedule. But we eventually overcame it, right? Like a business, a for-profit entity is going to find a way, if at all possible, in order to keep production moving, to keep revenue coming in, and keep salaries paid. So that ended. We kind of moved on. I hadn't really thought of him in a long time. And then he sent us an email, just kind of a quick update where he was at. He was out of rehab. He was doing a lot better. And he ended the email wondering if we might consider letting him come back to his old job. Now, as someone who had a lot of experience with him one-on-one, I was very wary of this. But, some of my higher ups and some of the HR people maybe were not so hesitant, but they hadn't had as much one-on-one time with him. So we invited him to a Zoom conversation. We just wanted to check in with him, see how he was doing, and see if it might be a potential fit for him to come back. And that was a couple days ago. We're at the point where that conversation went really well, and we do expect to have him come back in. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit concerned that, maybe all of those issues aren't totally resolved, because someone's only going to tell you what they want you to hear, right? And I think that's maybe what was coming across in that conversation we had, certainly in the initial round of interviews like 8 months ago. People just put on their best front when they need something, right? When they're in a job interview. And that kind of leads me to my next point, that I absolutely detest job interviews. I've been out of school a couple years now. I've been at one company for a while, so I haven't been interviewing in that I've been looking for a job recently, but I hated the interview process when I was coming out of college because it always just struck me as so fake, right? Like these HR reps ask you these questions that they have to ask you. They're probably on some page saved on some file somewhere. They ask these same questions hundreds of times. You're going to tell them the answers that they want to hear. If you don't do that, then you're probably not looking for a job, right? I'm not saying people are always totally dishonest in job interviews, but they definitely sugarcoat things, right? And they're not going to come out and tell you, hey, these are the things that I'm working on. These are my weaknesses, and these are the areas where I'm going to need support. In all honesty, that would probably make businesses and the whole hiring process a lot easier and more efficient if people were just totally upfront with each other. That's something I often think about. Like, why can't the world just be more transactional? Why do we have to get our emotions wrapped up in everything? It's because we really care about how other people perceive us. Why do we care about that? I don't know. It's probably some evolutionary thing, right? Like where we needed to be accepted by our community. So thousands of years ago, the perception of others really mattered, right? It could dictate life or death. It's not the case anymore. But anyway, I'm getting a little sidetracked here. But the point I was getting at is I wish sometimes the world could just be a lot more straightforward in things like jobs, workplace politics, dating even. Like, I think about this a lot. Like, imagine if you could just have a relationship. And I think this is possible. It's been something I've been thinking about. And this is how I plan to approach dating in the future. But imagine if you could just sit down with someone, ask them some basic questions about what they're interested in, where they're going in life, and just ask them candidly, hey, what are you good at and what are you bad at, or what are you working on might be a better question. And then you do the same thing. You just make a list and say, hey, these are my strengths. these are my weaknesses, and these are the things that I'm looking for in a potential partner. And that's actually, as I look to get back into dating, probably in the semi-near future, that's an exercise I did. I started on it today, actually. I listed, these are specifically in numbered order, the things that I'm looking for in a potential partner, numbered order of importance. And then I literally listed my strengths as I see them and my weaknesses. And it's a really interesting exercise, and it was a lot harder than I had expected because it's not something you just naturally do, right? I think self-perception is not something that comes naturally to everyone. It probably comes naturally more so to me than maybe other people, but I'm a little weird. I'm kind of introverted and I spend a lot of time thinking and analyzing myself. But even for someone like me who spends a lot of time, it did take some thinking to think, okay, what am I truly good at? I made a list, and you have to be objective with it. And then, hey, what am I struggling with? And you just take your ego out of it. And as long as you're working on those weaknesses, then in honesty, they can be a source of confidence more than they're a detriment to you. I don't know. Maybe dating can work that way. And I just haven't been playing it straightforward enough. That's what I think about. I can't stand any kind of games that we seem to play, and the interview process, the job interview process has always seemed like this huge game that we all play. And yet at the same token, there isn't really a great alternative, right? I mean, you have to have some type of conversation formally before you invite someone into your business because you have so much to lose, right? There's a lot of money on the line. And if anything, working lately, I've learned just how big of an investment it is for new people coming into the company, and you hope that that investment pays off. But the times it doesn't, and that does happen fairly often, you're on the hook for thousands of dollars, right? Like you have the salary that you paid this person before they were able to provide you much of a return. You have maybe recruiting fees if you hire a headhunting service, moving expenses, getting that person moved to the city if they're coming from a different part of the country. So it's really expensive, and you really hope that they work out. So you're just looking for any kind of indication that the person might be a good fit. But most of the time, a lot of information is lost in the interview process. Really, the only thing that you're left with through dating and the interview process is gut intuition. And it's probably something that I personally ignored for a lot of years. I don't really know why. Maybe just because you're worried that people are going to perceive you a certain way if you just follow your gut. But ultimately, you're the only person that matters in this equation, right? No one else really matters. So the only thing you're left with is a certain gut sense about people. And as I've interviewed more people, as I've dated more people, I've started to get a stronger sense. You can't always put your finger on it, but it's just a feeling, hey, that person's going to be good. I like what they're all about. Or, you know what? There's something a little off about that person, and I don't think they're going to be either a good fit in my business or a good fit in my life as a romantic partner or even a friend, like if you're getting to know someone. So back to the question that I posed at the beginning of this episode, can people actually change? And I mean, it's a broad question, but the obvious answer is yes. Like there's plenty of circumstances that we can look at where people have made incredible, tangible changes to their life. So I'm not one of these completely jaded people who says, oh, no one can change and they're always going to revert back to what they were. I don't believe that. I've made a lot of positive changes in my life, but I know something so serious as depression or addiction or self-harm or any of these really deep-seated problems, they run so deep. They usually go back to as far as childhood, right? Or in the very early years. And I think they usually come from a deep-seated lack of self-esteem. And repairing self-esteem, speaking personally, is a process that takes a long time, right? And it can take years. So I'm always wary if someone has a serious issue that I know about in my life, either a friend or someone I'm dating or an employee, and they come back in a fairly short amount of time, say under a year, with the assumption that, hey, everything's fixed in my life, I'm ready to go back and everything's good now. I think serious change like that takes a lot of time. A lot of times it doesn't happen because most people don't have the discipline to actually initiate the kind of routine that will result in change. And even if they do, it takes years, in my opinion. What I want to leave you with on this note is don't be too jaded. I'm probably a little bit too jaded on people, and that's something I'm working on. But what I want you to do is vet people in your life very thoroughly. Speaking from someone who hasn't done that as carefully as I probably should have in a number of areas, and it's kind of come back to bite me in the ass. Vet people, ask good questions, listen, pay attention to the tiny details that you might otherwise, just throw out, because most people aren't going to tell you the dark truths about themselves. It's up to you to figure it out and to determine what you're willing to put up with and what's a deal breaker for you. So vet, set those boundaries, and protect yourself.